This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free, complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201. Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
Welcome to Nick Hood Ministries. I'm Nick Hood, pastor and senior minister of the Plymouth United Church of Christ, located in the heart of Detroit. And today I have a young ministerial couple. Both the husband and the wife are ministers. We have Reverend David Nunn Telford, and Candace, Reverend Candace Nunn Telford. Hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a couple. I'm very impressed with the two of you. You're young and married, and also theological and ministerial. You're pastoral. And I hope a little later in the show we can talk about that. But today I want to talk about Isaiah chapter 35, verses 1 to 2. And I don't know if there's anybody looking at this today who's ever felt like you've been in a dry place, where, when you're in a desert, you're thirsty. And, it's one thing to be physically thirsty, but it's another thing to be spiritually thirsty. And in Isaiah 35, verses 1 to 2, the prophet tells the people, the wilderness and the dry places shall rejoice, the desert shall blossom like the rose. And if you stick around in just a moment, we're going to come right back and talk about this text. And I want you to ask yourself, am I dry? Am I in a dry place? Am I spiritually dry? Am I figuratively dry? Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free, complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
Thank you again for joining us. I have with me today the Reverend Candace Nunn Telford and the Reverend David Nunn Telford. And we're looking at Isaiah 35, verses 1 to 2. And Reverend David, I'd like you to start. You know, I'm a gentleman. Normally I would ask the female to begin, but you know, you or the pastor, you've pastored for a few years, Presbyterian Church in New York, and you're a graduate of the Yale Divinity School, and you represent this current generation. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, what does that text say to you? What do you think Isaiah is trying to get across?
Anytime I approach any biblical text, right, I'm asking a few questions, and I think that most readers, I invite us to ask a few questions, right? Who wrote the text? Why did they write it? When did they write it? And like, who exactly are they writing for? Like, what's the purpose? And Isaiah is a very fascinating text because this is a prophet who is writing or set in the 8th century BC. And what's really happening is a little bit of reflection. There is a moment where the people of biblical Israel find themselves in exile in Assyria. And they're asking themselves as a community, how did we get here? And one of the things that Isaiah does, it allows the community to take a look back at the ways in which they found themselves in exile. And there are lots of different reasons why the biblical text talks about why the people ended up in exile, but part of it is historical and some of it is even economic. There was a large part of this ancient society that was deeply imbalanced and unjust. There were poor people who were being gleaned and hurt by the wealthy. And this prophet was speaking out against like those injustices. And so what you have is you have an imbalanced, unjust society that is walking further and further away from God. And that's part of how they understand how they end up in this exile in Assyria. Mm-hmm. But then Isaiah does this amazing thing in chapter 35, verses 1 to 2. They're in exile. They have found themselves suffering because some of the mistakes that the community made, especially those who were at the top of it. But Isaiah says, even though we have found ourselves in exile, God has not abandoned us. Even though the community made some mistakes, that is not where we have to stay. We are in exile. We are in this desert, this dry place, and yet God is still able to do some amazing things in our lives. And so I think that this is a fascinating text because it speaks to hope and redemption, even when individuals and communities and cities and nations, when we have made mistakes and failed people that we ought not to have failed. Isaiah is the prophetic voice saying that there is an opportunity to, even in those places, come back. Even in those places, find redemption. So that's part of the message of this passage.
I began with the program today saying that, raising the question, you know, who looking at this program is in a dry place? And I think the people of Israel, in addition to all that you've said, were also in a dry place spiritually because during the time of Solomon, you know, even long before this Assyrian conquest, during the time of Solomon, you know, Solomon really expanded the borders of Israel through intermarriage. And he did not insist that the women that he married would give up their gods. So you had Molech, you know, who, you know, the worshipers of Molech would sometimes, for different reasons, sacrifice the eldest son. You had Baal. You had the worship of Diana, the temple prostitutes, and as part of an agrarian society, wanted the crops to grow, and they'd act that out in the temple with these temple prostitutes. And so I think you're spot on, that the people were in a dry place. Yet Isaiah is giving them hope. And can you talk a little bit more about this hope and that how Isaiah saw them blossoming like a rose? Mm-hmm. Not blossoming like the flower that dies every year, but the flower that comes back every year. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think that when we think about how far the people of biblical Israel kind of had traveled away from the path that God had set out for them, they're tied to God and their faith, but in particular, what that meant for how they treated one another and how they treated their society. I think that there were many moments where they looked at themselves spiritually, communally, and thought that everything was done, right? Like there was no hope for them, that it was all over. But I think that for the metaphor to be that they would blossom as a rose and be able to, come back. I don't know that much about, horror culture and all that, but roses to me have always been the more resilient of flowers, right? Not only are they intensely beautiful, they also give off, right, this amazing fragrance, right? Mm-hmm. So they almost add beauty to the, not only to the visual ecosystem, but to how we even perceive how spaces smell. And so for me, I think for that comparison to be made, it's really speaking to not only how resilient the people would be, how their faith would be, but also the impact that they would have on the people around them. And so those are just like a few of the things that come up for me as I think of Isaiah saying, this is not going to be our lot forever. God is going to bring us back.
I think about that sometimes. I live on the Lower East Side of Detroit, and the Lower East Side of Detroit has experienced a lot of vacancy, in the neighborhoods. But in spite of the vacancy, in spite of the large stretches on city blocks where there's nothing, you'll see roses growing in some houses, through the fence. I call it the ghetto rose. You're in the ghetto, but the roses are still blossoming. We're going to take a station break, but when we come back, I want to come back with you, Reverend Candace, and to get your take from an emotional standpoint, psychological standpoint. What do you think might have been going on with the people of Israel? But we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because, of course, you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this platform, this new platform, will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world, and Lord knows we need it.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
Again, thanks for joining my program today. It's a very special program. I have a clergy couple in the Reverend Candace and the Reverend David Nunn Telford. And they're joined by, is it the Queen of Sheba?
Queen Sheba, our dog.
Queen Sheba. All right. Yeah, Queen Sheba is historic in that she's the first pet to be on this set. I love it.
He's breaking records.
Right, breaking records.
Right. But Reverend Candace, I know you're pursuing a PhD in some psychological area. And for our audience, just tell us a little bit about that. But then I want to hear your thoughts about these people that Isaiah is preaching to who are in a virtual wilderness.
Right. So again, thank you for having us. I went to a HBCU. I went to Vanderbilt Divinity School, and now I'm at Garrett, completing my PhD. It's like a dual program situation. I'm in the pastoral theology, personality, and culture, and there's a clinical track, and my clinical track is focused on psychoanalysis. So that's where ultimately my ambition and work will take me, which is very exciting. So that's pretty much what I'm doing in that realm. I think to your second question about the people, I think that the book of Isaiah can really show us the positive impact that religion and a strong faith base can have, not only on the individual, but also for a community. That even when it might be hard and difficult, being connected to one another, having a shared meaning for life and a higher being can really mobilize people even when they're in a difficult season.
And what are your thoughts about this imagery that Isaiah presents of the wilderness shall blossom? You know, can you imagine people who are emotionally or spiritually in a desert?
Yeah, so a lot of times when people come to see me, there has been something that has happened in their life, or they might just be in a season where they may feel like they're in a desert, they may feel like nothing's going right for them, and so it's really important for that imagery that like things can change, and that like trials, tribulations that might happen can be seasonal, can only happen for a little bit of time, but there is a possibility for things changing. And I think believing in that, hoping in that, solidifying a discipline in that is what's going to get you through that particular season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to shift gears for a minute. I'm impressed with the two of you. You're both young. I hope you don't mind me saying that. But, you know, there's only one time in your life when people will refer to you as young, and the rest of it is just all downhill from there. But to be a young clergy couple, could you share with our audience what that's like? I don't know if anybody looking at this is thinking about, you know, maybe your own life, you know, and have you ever wondered what it would be like to be married to a minister? And then imagine if both the husband and the wife and the husband are ministers. So what's that like?
Is it okay if I start?
Yeah. Please.
I find it to be one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had in life because, you know, I met my spouse, you know, when they were already, you know, serving a church and, you know, a leader in a faith community. But you get to know a person in so many different ways. And, you know, people at home may not always remember this, but we as ministers are full humans, right? We're multidimensional. And so to be able to get to know, you know, my spouse in so many different ways, but then, to be able to bear witness to them serving people. It's unlike anything that I've ever seen. I was there when my spouse was ordained, and that was an incredibly beautiful spiritual experience, just to be able to witness the impact that they had on their church while they were in Tennessee, and then also being able to witness them preach, just to hear how they approach the text, how they interact with the crowd, how they themselves, approach a community and, in a Bible passage. All of that to me is really cool. I find it a gift. So it's been really awesome.
Yeah. I think that this is not just an interest or hobby, but it's a life calling. And so to be able to share with my spouse in that way, have deep conversations, whether we agree or disagree on a text or an issue, a theological issue or claim, I think has been very rewarding. I also really enjoy just having my spouse as a thought partner, being able to think through different things, especially since I'm on this PhD journey, which has been a great resource. Our denominations are different. I'm Baptist. I was ordained Baptist, you're UCC. And so also learning about the particularities of what that looks like has been cool to see as well.
Yeah. One thing I'll add is, we are not each other's pastors, no. And I think that drawing some of those boundaries has been really, really helpful for us, right? Because we are very clear that while we share a lot of things in common, we're able to talk about our faith journeys, as you mentioned. We also know that we have our own faith leaders that we go to, or faith communities that we align ourselves with. And I think that those boundaries have also been really healthy for us as well.
Mm-hmm. So just off the top of your head, what kind of suggestions would you give to an individual who feels like they're in a dry place? And before you do that, let me share with you one of the techniques I've used. And in full disclosure, I have not done this at all this year, but I look at every year there's a woman in my church who gives me a calendar of a Bible quote per day, a Bible verse per day. And she asked me this year, she said, "Do you still want me to give you the Bible verse for a day for Christmas?" I said, "Yes." And I told her how I use it. I said, when I can't think of anything else to preach on, I go to that Bible verse for the day. And, things have been so busy in my life, I haven't looked at that Bible verse for a day this year. But that's one way, for the preacher, one of the expressions about preaching is sometimes you're in a dry place. Yeah. You're looking for inspiration, and the biggest inspiration is just trying to figure out what to preach.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, from the two of you, what advice would you give to people looking at this program today about how to get out of a dry place?
I think first I would take a moment to assess your needs and see if there are any immediate needs that need to be responded to. Once that has been taken care of, I would connect to community. I would go and connect to a local church or a faith tradition that the person practices. I would get involved in the community, maybe around an issue or an activity or something that is happening in the community that you're passionate about. And then I would say that if you feel like you are in that place, then look for a mental health professional and connect with them and go through that process with them, because a lot of times there aren't spaces for you to just talk about what's going on with you uninterrupted, with no judgment, without anything impeding on that space outside of therapy. I have my spouse, which is great, but therapy is a space that is solely for you, that you do not have to share. And so my recommendation would to connect with a mental health professional.
Reverend David,
Yeah,
what would you add?
Yeah, so I concur with everything that my spouse has just named. You know, the only thing that I want to kind of like underscore there is what I loved about what my spouse said was about kind of finding a space of non-judgment, because what was so important to me thinking about this passage is that Isaiah is telling a community like, look, y'all, we messed up, right? And sometimes like when we find ourselves in a dry place, it can be hard to admit that maybe some of our own actions got us there. But I think that what Isaiah is trying to communicate is that even in those spaces, like we don't have to linger there. That even when we mess up, there's still space for redemption. There's still an opportunity for us to find community. There's still an opportunity for us to find grace. And so to anyone who might be experiencing a dry season, a dry space, some self-forgiveness might be, on the menu. Finding a moment to say that I may have messed up, but there's still grace, there's still love for me. I am not the totality of my struggles. And in that light, my hope is that you might be able to go to a mental health professional. In that light, I hope that you might be able to reach out to friends and family and your communities, because we all deserve love and redemption and hope. And I think that that's what Isaiah is trying to get the community to see.
Well, Reverend David Nunn Telford and Reverend Candace Nunn Telford, I really have enjoyed talking with the two of you. I've enjoyed hearing your perspective on faith and relationships, the dry places and how they can blossom. We're about out of time, but and I'm delighted that you're here and that you're going to be here next week as well. And so, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. Next week, we're going to talk about the lukewarm Christian. And there's nothing worse than a lukewarm Christian. And the Nunn Telfords are going to be with me, and we're going to talk about this. So call your friends, tell them what they can expect, and I leave you with this one little blessing. Remember, I am praying for you.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out.